Have you ever noticed how some souls walk through fire and emerge scorched, while others seem to dance with the same flames untouched? In a world humming with hidden chaos, where unseen wars are fought in the silence of minds, some seem constantly surrounded by turmoil, while others move like ghosts through stormy streets, invisible to the very things that haunt you. Perhaps you've asked yourself, why me? Why do these people find me? Why does the drama knock on my door again and again, draining me, manipulating me, leaving me breathless in a life that feels like a battlefield? And you, the peacekeeper, the giver, the one who avoids the clash but ends up bruised by the very war you tried to escape. You, who wonders late at night if there's something broken within, something that makes you a lighthouse for the lost and the toxic. If these thoughts echo inside you, stay. Not because I offer an escape, but because together, we might touch something that was buried beneath the noise, something so quiet and ancient, it only speaks when everything else falls silent. Carl Jung, the architect of shadows and whispers of the psyche, once hinted at a truth too raw for most to bear. That what attracts the darkness to us is not merely chance or misfortune. It is a resonance, a hum from our wounded places, the parts of us we pretend not to feel. It's not strength or toughness that shields others from the chaos. It's a silence of a different kind. A silence born not of suppression, but of integration. You see, those we call toxic, the manipulators, the emotional hunters, they are not guided by reason. They are creatures of instinct, drawn to the scent of unresolved sorrow. They do not need to be told your fears, they feel them. Not with logic, but with a primal intuition that knows exactly where the cracks in your soul lie. And the cruel irony is, the more you try to hide your wounds, the louder they become. To become invisible to these predators, you do not need to fight. You do not need to scream or build walls or push people away. The real transformation happens not in resistance, but in return, in turning inward into the rooms of your mind you've locked and left untouched. Jung called it the shadow, the unlit basement of your being, where everything you feared to be hides, waiting not to be banished, but to be seen. And when you finally open that door, not with judgment, but with curious acceptance, something extraordinary begins. The projections fade. You no longer cast your darkness onto others, no longer draw out their claws with your hidden pain. You no longer wear signs that say, I need your validation, or I fear being alone. You simply exist, whole in your own skin, and to the emotional predator, this is unbearable. They pass you by, not because you have hidden, but because you no longer bleed. What changes is not the world, but how the world sees you. You stop broadcasting frequencies of fear, insecurity, or need. You become smooth stone, impervious not because you've armored yourself, but because you've absorbed the parts of you that once betrayed you. And in this silence, this inner stillness, toxic people find no purchase. Their hooks slide off. Their games collapse in your presence. But this journey is not easy. The map is not drawn in straight lines or steps. It begins in the question, what have I buried? What do I refuse to see in myself that keeps finding me in others? That partner who lied, that friend who manipulated, that boss who controlled, they are not coincidences. They are mirrors, and not gentle ones. Everything that stings about another, that enrages you or draws you in obsessively, is trying to show you a reflection, a piece of yourself you have yet to claim. Maybe it's the part that longs to be loud, to take space, to demand without apology. Maybe it's the part that resents, envies, or burns with desire you've labeled shameful. When you deny these parts, you give them away. You see them in others, hate them in others, chase them, or run from them. And this is the prison, to be governed by what you do not know about yourself. Freedom begins not when you change others, but when you turn that gaze inward and ask with brutal tenderness, what does this person awaken in me? What forgotten voice are they echoing? What part of me have I silenced so deeply that only chaos can call it back? There is no enemy more cunning than our own unconscious. It leads us into the same patterns, the same toxic cycles, across different faces and places. You change jobs, partners, homes, but the lesson follows. Because the lesson is not out there. It is in the unspoken contracts you carry within. The beliefs that say, I must please to be loved. I must suffer to prove I'm good. I must never ever be alone. These are open doors, not to the world, but to those who sense exactly how to use them. And as long as they exist, your boundaries will fail. Because real boundaries aren't fences. They are knowing. They are the unshakable truth of who you are and what you deserve. They are invisible lines drawn not on paper, but in your energy, in your presence. You don't have to say no with your mouth, you radiate it. But to reach that point, you must be willing to lose what once held you captive. The approval, the peacekeeping, the false sense of harmony that costs your soul. You must be willing to let go of being the good one, the nice one, the agreeable one, because those masks are heavy, and behind them, your power is suffocating. The ones who manipulate, who gaslight, who drain you, they rely on you not knowing your own strength. They rely on your fear of rejection, your need to be seen as kind. They smell the guilt before you speak. They watch how quickly you apologize for things you didn't even do. And every time you bend, just a little, you feed their hunger. But imagine this, a moment where you no longer react, where their silence doesn't move you, where their criticism doesn't reach. Not because you don't feel, but because you know. You know yourself so well, so deeply, that nothing they say or withhold defines you anymore. This is neutrality, not numbness, but power. You hold your center like a mountain holds the sky. And in this stillness, they cannot dance their drama. They grow bored. They leave. Not because you pushed them away, but because you offered no food. And yet, to reach this space, you must also go where few dare, into your own darkness, into the truths you've denied. That sometimes you too want control, that sometimes you too manipulate, that you are not always the victim, the saint, the innocent one. This is the final and hardest doorway. To meet the part of you you've been terrified to admit exists. The one who feels jealousy, rage, pride. The one who dreams of power, of revenge, of domination. And to say, yes, you are me. I see you. Not to act on it, not to glorify it, but to own it. Because the moment you stop pretending to be only light, you stop fearing your shadow. And in that moment, no one can use it against you. This is integration, the end of the inner war, the birth of psychic integrity. It's what Jung called becoming whole, not pure, not perfect, whole. And when you are whole, toxic people see nothing to conquer. You are not at war, and so they cannot battle. You are not bleeding, and so they cannot feed. You exist in a frequency they cannot hear. And then, something else happens. You begin to attract differently, not just in relationships, but in life. People who see you, not your wounds. People who respect you, not because you demand it, but because you carry yourself in a way that requires it. People who are drawn not to your pain, but to your peace. The journey inward is brutal. It strips you bare, but what it gives back cannot be taken by anyone. Not their lies, not their silence, not their threats. Because you have looked into the eyes of your own shadow and chosen to stay. And in that choice, you are finally free. What happens when the soul, long silenced and fragmented, begins to remember its own voice? There is a trembling in that moment, subtle but undeniable, like the earth shifting far beneath the surface. At first, it feels like fear, because we are not used to our own power. We've become accustomed to carrying only pieces of ourselves, stitched together by other people's expectations, dulled by years of pleasing, performing, surviving. But when you begin to reclaim the forgotten parts, those exiled by shame, those muted by fear, you begin to awaken something ancient and vast. It doesn't roar, it doesn't beg, it simply is. And its presence begins to change everything. You find that you no longer rush to fill silences in conversations. You no longer shrink under disapproval. The urgency to be liked, to be chosen, to be understood dissolves, not because you've become indifferent, but because you have become enough. The emptiness you once carried like a sacred wound no longer needs to be filled by anything or anyone outside of you. It simply becomes a space, spaciousness, a breath, a holy stillness that the world in its chaos can neither disturb nor possess. And in this stillness, you begin to feel, not the surface feelings, the ones you perform for others, but the raw, unfiltered truth of your own emotional landscape, the griefs you never cried for, the angers you never honored, the joys you never dared to claim. They all come home. They knock quietly, waiting for you to open the door not to fix them, but to finally feel them. This is not about becoming invincible. It's about becoming real. Because invincibility is a lie, a mask that fractures under pressure. But realness, that deep alignment between who you are and how you live, is unshakable. It allows you to move through the world, not defended, but rooted. Not armored, but aware. You no longer need to protect yourself from every glance, every comment, every shift in energy, because you are no longer depending on the world to tell you who you are. You see now that validation is a hungry ghost. The more you feed it, the more it demands. But wholeness asks for nothing. It just is. And in that being, it transforms everything. There will be moments when the old patterns call you back, a familiar tone in someone's voice, an echo of a past rejection, a situation that mirrors an old wound so precisely it almost feels faded. But now you know. You recognize the terrain. You see the ghosts for what they are, remnants of an identity you no longer need to wear. You no longer react from the wound. You respond from the wisdom. And that difference is everything. You will notice that the people who once drained you begin to fall away, not in explosions or confrontations, but like mist dissolving in the morning sun. You don't need to push them out. Your very presence becomes uninhabitable to their games. What once required battles now happens through stillness, through clarity, through your refusal to abandon yourself. This is the quiet revolution of shadow work. It doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but inside, entire worlds are burning down, and something more honest is rising from the ashes. You no longer chase peace in external circumstances, because you've begun to build it internally, brick by brick, choice by choice. You no longer ask, "Who will love me if I change?" But instead, "What part of me am I betraying to be loved as I am not?" And then, something breaks open, not like glass, but like a seed, a tender, trembling emergence, not of perfection, not of certainty, but of truth. You find yourself saying things you used to swallow. You start choosing silence over explaining, solitude over tolerating. Your energy no longer leaks into convincing others to see your value because you've started to feel it for yourself. Not the loud, performative kind, but the steady, quiet certainty that you are enough, even in your mess, even in your doubt, even in your becoming. You begin to trust your number. You honor your yes. You realize that boundaries are not a rejection of others. They are a devotion to yourself, a declaration that your peace is sacred, that your soul is not a marketplace for the unmet needs of others, that your attention is a gift, not an obligation. You walk differently, not with arrogance, but with presence. You listen to the world with deeper ears. The voices that used to thunder now sound distant, irrelevant. The praise that once intoxicated you now tastes like sugar water, sweet but unnecessary. You are no longer starving, and maybe for the first time, you begin to ask not, "What do they want from me?" but, "What do I want for my life?" And in that question, the world begins to reshape itself around your truth. Not everyone will understand. Some will try to pull you back into the roles you've outgrown. Some will accuse you of being selfish, cold, distant. But they are not speaking to the real you. They are speaking to the version of you that kept them comfortable, that said yes when it meant no, that tolerated pain so they wouldn't have to grow. Let them speak. Your silence now is not submission. It is sovereignty. You have begun the slow, sacred work of becoming whole, not because someone rescued you, not because the world changed, but because you made the quiet decision to stop abandoning yourself. And that changes everything.